Hello, I'm Bernie Wall, and this video is going to discuss the topic of managing time in IELTS writing. Now, there's a million and one things I can say about IELTS writing. It's a very big topic, and also it's something that takes a long time and probably is the hardest of all the IELTS parts of the IELTS test to improve. And there are many reasons for that. There are a lot of components. You have to manage your vocabulary, your structure, your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation, all very well as the ideas that you present to the examiner. So you can expect to spend a lot of time on your writing practice before you get to the level of, say, Band 7, because it takes longer to get there with writing for most people than it does for the other parts. Now, many students go into the exam without a clear strategy, and that can be quite risky when you're trying to get a high band. You should really be going into the exam knowing exactly how you're going to create those tasks. And I'm not talking about the content here, because obviously until you see the questions, you won't know the content. But in terms of the vocabulary, structures, and the overall look of the essay or the task one that you want to write, you should already know before you go into the exam exactly how that's going to be when you sit down and do that writing test. And that takes practice. So that's why, as well as improving your overall language, because in the writing you cannot afford to make many mistakes, you also need to practice all of these things so that when you get to the exam, it just goes into automatic pilot. If you are one of those students, and I believe there are many, who just go into the exam, look at the question for a couple of minutes, and then start writing, then you're setting yourself up for almost failure, but certainly for not getting a high band. Because when you do that kind of stream of consciousness writing, several things happen. Firstly, managing the time is difficult because you're writing, and it's not so organized. So you may find that you write right up to the last second. And I know this from what students have told me. The second problem with timing is that you might not balance the two tasks. So you may spend more time on task 1, for example, and not have enough time for task 2, or vice versa if you do them the other way around. The second problem is organization. When you're writing sort of instinctively like this, then you're not thinking too much about how you're organizing. Okay, you may have an organized plan in your head, but you're up against the time if you're just writing straight from the question. So the organization can suffer, and the coherence and the cohesion and all of that can suffer too. The third point, which I think is the most important, is that the ideas become more important than the language. So when you're writing and thinking at the same time, the ideas are the things that are coming into your head. Now, the IELTS demands the opposite. The IELTS demands that the language is paramount, and it is how you express the ideas, the sorts of language you use, and the sorts of vocabulary, etc., that will get you the Band 7, not the ideas. They're not important insofar as you present them. They have to fit with the question, and they have to be sensible, and they have to reflect the question. But other than that, it does not matter what the ideas are. What is important is the language, and that suffers. The fourth thing is that you can easily digress. You're writing, and suddenly an idea comes in, you think that's a great idea, and you can go off down a different route. And that route can take you to answering another question, not the question that was set. It might be the same topic, but it might not be exactly the question that was set. And this happens a lot. And then finally, your work can become very messy. And this poses a problem for the examiner, because if the examiner cannot read your work easily, they're not going to have enough time to try and sit and decipher. So I know myself, I used to be an examiner. If I was given a very messy script, it would tell me something about the organization and what I was going to read before I even read it. So a messy script does usually show disorganization, and the likelihood of getting a high band is minimized by that. So it's very important that you don't just write from the hip, so to speak. There are, in fact, 3 stages to the writing: planning, actual writing, and checking. The planning saves you a lot of time, because if you put the ideas down before you start writing, then you can focus completely on the language as you write. The planning also helps you to make sure that your essay is well organized, covers all the things in the band descriptors that need to be in there, and it also helps you to focus on how you're going to present your ideas. And the final stage is checking. Now, with the best will in the world, you will be unlikely, unless you're a native speaker or very near native speaker, to produce a piece of writing that is flawless. And there will be things to check. And if you don't check, then you're handing some often silly mistakes straight to the examiner, and they will count against your band. So it's really vital that you put this checking phase into all of your writing practice, and you plan it in your timing as well. So if you do all 3, you plan, you focus on the language while you write, and you check any mistakes, then you'll find that your writing will be more accurate, it will be better organized, it will probably present a better answer to the question, and most importantly, it will get you a higher band. And you'll also be able to manage it in the time. So I want to have a look at how you can do this. I'm going to focus mostly on the planning and on the checking, and I'm going to romp through very quickly because we haven't got that much time. And as I mentioned before, I'm only going to scratch the surface here. But if I can share my screen with you, I'll do that now. And then we'll just go through a few slides that I set up. So, firstly, let's have a look at a few reminders. So, have patience with writing, it will take time. Practice regularly. If you don't, then you're not going to improve. But one thing that's really important about the practice is that you need it checked before you do your next piece, because otherwise they will all have the same mistakes. Writing for IELTS isn't creative. It's formal, it's academic, or it's more kind of report-like if you're doing general training. It's not storytelling. So you need to bear that in mind. And you need to focus hard on the mechanics of writing, the vocabulary, the punctuation, the spelling. That's what will get you the high marks, not the ideas. If you practice this a lot, and I'll show you just before we finish, you'll know what you're going to write in the exam and know what the examiner wants to see. Look at those band descriptors to see what the examiner's looking for. Okay, let's have a quick look at planning for task 1. Essentially, it's an analysis of the data or the map or the diagram, and then deciding what you're going to use, how you're going to organize it into your 2 main paragraphs, how you're going to deal with the numbers. So that's really the planning. You need to spend a little bit of time looking at what you're going to use and how you're going to use it. So are you going to have 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs? This is not your overall statement and your introduction, but the main paragraphs. How are you going to organize the data? Often there are a couple of ways. Do what seems to you the most obvious and the easiest. Think about the numbers. Which numbers are you going to use? Where you've got a lot of numbers, how are you going to group them? Are you going to have some that are averages or approximates? Are you going to have some that are in a range? There are lots of different ways of doing numbers. And if you're not sure, go and look at the vocabulary for describing numbers. Choose an overall comment. What's the thing that hits you when you look at the data, or when you look at the diagram, or when you look at the map, and then make that overall comment. Students usually do that after their introductory statement, which is probably the most sensible place to put it. But it is possible to put it right at the end. If you forget, you could put it right at the end. And this kind of method of analysis and deciding on the organisation and picking out what you want to highlight works for all the academic task 1 types. For the general training letter, decide on the tone. You have 3 types: formal, informal, semi-formal. Which one is it? And then start from the reply that you would want for this letter. So what do you want the person to write back and say? And then write your letter to get that response. So if you want them to give you a new bank card, write the letter so that that's what they'll do. If you want them to come and look after your pets, write the letter so that they will agree to come and look after your pets. So start with what you want as a response and then write to get that reply. Okay. This is a good overall task. This is what I use for task 2. So obviously these are just labels. And if you did it, these would have topic content-based titles. So it would be something like the environment, or how airlines can spoil the environment, something like that. Then the second one here is you talk about the issue or premise. So is it a discussion? Some people believe this, others believe that. Is it problem solution? Is it how far do you agree? Is it what's your opinion? And then here at the end, you state your position. If you don't have a position, like in a problem solution, then you have a general statement, which leads on to your first paragraph. And here, this is a good structure for both paragraphs. So your main point, why do you believe that? What evidence have you got to support that? Then you can add another piece of evidence in another paragraph, in another sentence, using something like moreover, furthermore, and then give an example. If this is quite short and you need more words, you can add another short idea and use things like in addition, secondly, similarly, any of that. If you've done firstly, secondly, it depends how you structure it. And then do the same sort of thing for the second paragraph. Do not make it identical. If you've done an example here, don't put an example here. Do a little bit more evidence or an extra idea. So make them a little bit different but balanced. And then in your conclusion, 2 or 3 sentences. I advise you to do at least 2, because 1 sentence isn't a paragraph, and there is a danger the examiner might say, that's not a paragraph. So don't open yourself to that sort of problem. Okay, so I talked before about time. Now, one way to write more quickly and accurately is to have the structures that you're going to use before you go into the exam. So I'm going to use firstly, secondly, thirdly, or I'm going to use on the one hand, on the other hand, or I'm going to start my first paragraph with an ing form, and I'm going to start my second paragraph with in contrast, or something like that. Don't be too rigid, because you need to be flexible when you see the question, but have a limited number of structures that you know you can use well and you're going to use. Okay, practice these a lot. Get a teacher to check. Experiment with different ones. You can find hundreds of them in the model essays. Look at the model essays and try them out. If they work, great, add them to your little bank. If they don't work, try again. If you keep having problems, then forget them, because there are plenty of different sentence structures. There's no point in trying to write something that you're not 100% certain about. Just ditch it and use a different one. And don't ever try and use a new structure or a new word that you've never used before and are not sure of in the exam. It's suicidal. Okay. And finally, checking. As I said before, check every time, you know, even in your practice. And the first thing you should do is have a mental list of the mistakes that you make all the time. I'm sure these will include articles, subject-verb agreement, maybe prepositions, maybe singular plural. There are a whole host of quite elementary mistakes that are often made. But look through your past essays. Look at the mistakes that you keep making over and over and over, and the ones that you say, I can't believe I made that mistake again. Those are the ones to check first. And if you only have 30 seconds or 1 minute at the end of the exam, check those first, because you do not want to lose your band 7 for a stupid article mistake. In your practice, read your writing out loud. Clearly, you can't do this in the exam. But as you read out loud, you'll stumble where there's a mistake. And then that helps you to keep analysing and doing an error analysis and finding the mistakes, and then you will begin to eliminate them. Again, include this checking part in your practice. It's really important that it becomes second nature, so that in the exam, you will do it automatically. And finally, include it in your time calculation. So we're looking at maybe 5-10 minutes planning, and then 5 minutes checking. Maybe if you're up against it, maybe just 2 or 3 minutes checking. But don't skip these two parts, the planning and the checking. They will help you manage the time and reduce the number of errors. And all of that leads to a more accurate and better piece of writing, which will give you a band 7. Without them, you won't get the 7. So I hope this has been useful. I can't stress enough how important it is, and I can't stress enough how important it is to practice, 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 so that when you go in the exam, you have confidence that you know what you're doing. Okay, so I leave it for today. I hope that you put some of these things into your practice. I've written an article about this with some links. You can find it on my website, IELTSlearningtips.com. So please do go there, and you can sign up there for some more information. If you want more of these videos, then please hit the subscribe button underneath, so that every time I post one, you will know about it. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.